first and then get started. So first, oh, thank you. Thanks, Robert. First, I'm just going to go over the agenda. So we're going to talk about what is the Adobe Champion Program, and then we're going to introduce the champions on the call today, and then answer some pre-submitted questions. We're even going to circle back on a couple previous questions from our previous office hours, and then we'll answer any live questions you have. So feel free to, unmute, ask your question, or ask your question in the chat. We'll definitely look at it, and then we'll wrap it up. So really quickly, what is the AEM Champion Program? So the program recognizes expert practitioners that play key roles as thought leaders and product influencers. So we've shared expertise, best practices, strategies, and we collaborate with Adobe product leaders to support future visions for Adobe Experience Manager. The benefits are kind of the same. It's kind of the benefits to us and Adobe. It's kind of the same. So just sharing that knowledge, you really get to meet a different group of people across the world, as we kind of already hinted at today. And everyone within all their expertise within AEM. We get to collaborate with one another and ask questions. We all have like a Slack channel, so just talking, asking different questions of what we're experiencing, and then even getting to meet with Adobe product leaders and also engage. So something like this, office hours, is a great place where we get to answer different questions related to a specific topic, but also there's different various webinars or public speaking events and opportunities to present just our expertise. And with that, we'll go through the panelists today. So we'll just start right or left to right. So Brett, if you want to go first.
Sure. So my name is Brett Birschbach, SVP of the Adobe practice at Bounius. Certified architect, done a lot of hands-on work over the years, and now lead a group of about 100 architects and developers at Bounius. Greg?
I'm Greg Dimmers. I'm a product owner of web content at T. Rowe Price. I've been a member of the Champions class since the inaugural class in 2022. And getting ready to welcome the 2023 class. And I've been working with Adobe Experience Manager since 2009, so a little over 15 years, something like that.
All right, and my name is Jessica Zweifel. I'm a senior web designer with Insight. I'm located in Phoenix, Arizona, so it's hot, hot, hot. We're breaking records for over 110 degrees, I think going on 20 plus days. So bear with me. Just living in AC at this point. Max, you want to go?
No worries, no worries. Well, I'm in Australia, and we're in the opposite scale. We're like 10, 12 degrees here, so it's pretty cold. I'm wearing a jump all the time, which is a great jump, as you can see. The red one is fantastic. So I am a Chief Technology Officer in Ancora, a founder. I've been doing AEM for a long time. You've probably seen me around, run a few blogs online.
I think that's my cue. So Romeo Gamal, thanks there, Max. Good way of passing the puck. I'm Canadian when I say pass the puck, not the ball, I guess.
Yes, I know. The puck, yes.
Right? So in Canada, we just don't know what's going on with the weather. It just depends on the day, right? But Romeo Gamal, Senior Solution Architect and the founder of Rene Consulting, been working with AEM for a long, long time, since like CQ 4.4 when it was all blue, and now it's all gray and black. That's it. Back to you, Jessica.
Man, bringing back the color schemes. That's a good one. Is there, okay, so first question, that was a pre-submitted question. Is there a better way to monitor the AEM workflows state rather than using a few different consoles in AEM? I'm gonna send that question in the chat, so if anyone missed it, you can reread it there.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I guess I could start by saying that as always, we usually preface everything in AEM with it depends, because it depends on your implementation, your use cases, how you set up your workflow approvals, so then how you can monitor them. I guess one thing we were discussing about as we're looking at the pre-submitted questions is, where does it make sense to keep your workflow approvals. Those that are parallel to what you're doing in serial, so like for different processes in your implementation. And if you could create, if you look at your overall approvals, what content you want to approve, what kind of processes you want to approve, then that's what's going to define where you monitor your approvals. You want to automate your AEM activities with your workflows, right? So there are a couple of different ways, besides the console, like it was mentioned. You could look at logs, user logs. You can use that web-based interface of the AEM logs that you have stored in your file system. You can set up email notifications for workflow events, such as when workflow is completed. So you get those notifications, and that's where your governance part comes in. The relevant stakeholders will get those emails, those notifications, and can be informed of when important workflows and triggers and activities are happening. You could set up replication and replication agents, monitor them separately, make sure they're being probably replicated, and then distributed across your AEM instances. And you could have if you're really good at this and you have your setup governance and you have users who can access custom monitoring dashboards, you could do that. Depending on your requirements, you can create those monitoring dashboards using built-in tools from AEM. And I know there are some cases where there are third-party analytics tools that you can use to monitor those workflows. You can get an overview of workflow performance using your key performance indicators, your KPIs. And besides that, you could have schedule reports that show you workflow performance and execution status, and or you could set up your triggers, alerts and triggers to specific workflow events, and so it's a host of different solutions basically that you could set up. I think that's all I had to mention on this one. I don't know if anyone else wanted to jump in and add anything.
Yeah, I think the tough thing is if the person who sent this question is in the crowd, it'd be cool to talk a little bit about whether this is like workflows in terms of approval workflows where people are involved, or certainly more in prior to AEM Cloud Service. There's a lot of just programmatic workflows too, like, hey, I put this asset in AEM and then it goes through workflows to process the asset. And so I think, when you look at a default interface in AEM, you're going to have kind of a mixture of these types of workflows depending on what's been made transient and what's actually visible and such. The data is all there though. And, to Greg's point, I think it's pretty easy for, if for whatever reason the interfaces that you're looking at in AEM are not giving you the view that you need, I don't think it's going to be a huge developer effort to go to your development team and say, hey, this is exactly what I need to see, because like I said, the content is there. A new screen could be created.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, totally, Brett. It's some of the things that I also done in the past year. You can essentially write content in your steps into some other location so that you can see the progress, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I have done it for reporting purposes where I would actually save files into, var location, right? But nothing stops you even creating a folder within assets and for each workflow actually write out the steps and what it finished.
Right.
Like just creating content. And I suppose that's one of the aspects of AEM is that trying to look at your technical implementation and thinking, how can you turn this into content? Yeah,
Exactly.
because logs is not really content. That's just more like a like exhaust pipe, right? It's not really cool. Yeah, it's just very hard. But I suppose workflows is because it's a managed process. There's nothing should be stopping you from going, okay, I'm going to treat this content. I'm going to, write this down into like some sort of, you can even use content fragment, right? So you can have the out of the box content fragment visibility for it, right? To be able to understand how the workflows are performing. Yeah. Because yeah, piecing together through emails and logs, I found over time is just so hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless
yeah,
you have some sort of logging solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Depends on the
Rami?
internal,
It's
external.
like, right? Max was like, hey, now I'm going to pass the puck. I honestly, I agree with everything that has been said. Now, just because I always do this to everybody, but it really goes back to what's a workflow and what's the workflow doing, right? So what's common, or what we know about a workflow, is it's a systematic set of steps that eventually you put them in series, in some cases parallel, based on point A to point B. You're trying to get to point B automatically, right? Approval is one incident. So page publishing, for example. Let's say you don't, I won't call it don't trust, but let's say you don't want your content authors to publish content because it has to pass by legal or design, etc. You're going to have a participant step, they have to approve it, etc., etc. But that's only one case, one use case. Let me give you a different example. Let's say during that process, you have Akamai in front of your AEM as your CDN. So in a lot of cases, what I've done for clients in the past is we had to create a step to go in and flush the cache from Akamai. Now that's an external thing, which means you're sending a request, you're waiting for the response to come back to confirm, is it 200? Are we flushed or are we not? Are we flushed? It's not necessarily a good way of positioning that sentence. But anyways, so it really depends on what you're trying to do. That's a different way. So if that's the case, maybe what you need to create is maybe a CSV somewhere, or to Max's point, somewhere in AEM that goes, these are the pages that have been flushed and these are the pages that failed to flush, right? So it's a little different from just publishing a page. Let me give you another example. Let's say you have, and this is something that I have to deal with as well, is a news feed, right? So every quarter we have a client, they have a news feed that they have to pull into the site. It comes in as an XML. It does have to go through an approval process. So we actually have to make the call, pull in the XML, parse it, create the pages, wait for people to approve. So now there's actually multiple steps into that workflow, where in every single step, you have to sort of gauge your oil level, right? So once we parse in the XML and put it into the page, it has to go to design to make sure that the page is okay. But once that's done, you move on to right before publishing, you have somebody to go in to look at the content, because this is legal content, right? If that's the case, maybe we had a whole separate page, and all it did is same idea. This is now approved by design, published, approved by design, not published because legal didn't approve it. So a lot of it has to do with how you're going to consume the data. So AEM provides out-of-box console that allows you to see where the workflow is at, but typically it's no different than logging statements. They differ in shape and nature based on the nature of what the log is or what the error is. So I think it has to do with what does the workflow do? Once you have that defined, we can figure out the result, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's key.
Very cool. Content
All
is
right.
king.
Yeah, content is king. All right, I'm gonna go to the next question. What is the best way to secure a page, folder, or asset from others without specific group permissions to see content? We found a way to create a special group and block only an author instance, but if the page is published and the URL is created, there's no way to prevent others to see it.
So when we looked at that question, there was a couple different thoughts, right? So the default answer is anything that has to do with permission should be done with permission, right? So if we're thinking author instance and you're trying to govern anything in author, workflow or no workflow, this is general, right? So your number one governance is permissions on using groups. Again, please do not assign permissions to a user, assign it to a group, then assign the user to that group. One-to-one mapping gets really, really evil after a while. Now, if what we're thinking of is I want to publish a piece of content and I want people to see it before it's unpublished, yet they don't have permission to author, and this is actually something that we've seen in the past before, comes in the preview tier. So before we typically had your author and your pub, right? And we've ran through this challenge multiple times where, I'll give you an example too. Before AEM's a cloud service at a client, and it was exactly that, where they wanted to publish the content. They wanted let's say the CEO of the company to see the page, but it's not prime time ready yet. So what we've done is we've created a CUG, a closed user group at that point, and we would assign the closed user group to that one page or set of pages. we'd push it to prod, but eventually the only way you can access it is through logging in, right? We have to create the user, but it doesn't really count towards your licensing in that sense because it's not an author user. It's not somebody who's going in and entering content, but they have to go in and log in. Now, we have the preview. So this is still a solution that you can use. We have now preview, and preview has a lot of governances, right? So it's a different domain. Essentially, you can go in and whitelist the IPs, or if you're going to do some dispatcher magic. So the only way you can access it through VPN or whatever. And if that's the case, you publish it to preview, get approval, and then you can publish to dev.
Yeah.
Then I'll leave it to the rest of the team. We good, Jessica?
Looks like everyone's good.
Nailed it.
Yep, perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself. Just kidding. We got a question from the chat. So it says we have a requirement where we have to run a particular workflow to a parent folder, and this folder contains millions of images. In such a scenario, do we need to use ACS Commons Bulk Workflow Manager to trigger this, as it handles the count as batches internally? Or do you have any other recommendation or best practice to follow to have no impact to performance on the instance? Note this activity is done in production.
Can we ask a question? Is this done on prem or SaaS? Whoever asked that. Obviously, if it's going to be on prem, you can use Bulk Manager. There's also Fast Action Manager, because you basically want to throttle the tasks you're executing. Yeah, that's already built into ACS Commons. But obviously, the Bulk Manager doesn't work in SaaS, so you'd be falling back to Fast Action Manager and going through that.
AMS.
AMS, yep. So
effectively, yeah. And you just do that. Anybody else?
Yeah, I say bulk editor is what I've always used for that situation. I mean, it's similar to if you're migrating a ton of assets into AEM, you need to process them. Same kind of thing. I think the biggest thing is if you're ever doing any of these big actions, making sure that you don't have any extra triggers that are cascading into new workflows that become a really big mess. But usually when you're executing from a workflow, it won't trigger the next workflow. But it's definitely something that you'd want to test a few times, make sure that you're not accruing more as you're executing through.
Yeah, that's one key. And I came upon that in the documentation, Brett, that really what might slow you down is like how your other processes, like if they're running in parallel, that's the only concern there with speed. So yeah, it's you got to set up your workflows so they're not concurrently running together. That slows you down. It's not the actual folder volume, but if it's running along with other workflows, that might be the slowdown.
Now, just a couple of things. I just wanted to confirm: is there a reason not to use ACS Commons? Because if there isn't, go ahead and do it. The second part to that statement is, there's always going to be a performance concern, right? Even if you thread it, even if you use the bulk, at the end of the day, it goes back to the nature of the workflow and how much load you're going to put on the author instance. It does concern me that we're seeing millions of images, just because now I'm thinking information architecture of why do you have a parent folder that has that many images? It's probably the root folder, like it's almost like dam/project, and then we're running the workflow on all the assets. I question the reason. But maybe a lot of the times we've had this where they want to add an extra metadata field, for example. If it's something as simple as that, that might be not bad. If you're going in and you're creating a whole bunch of renditions, I would still do some testing just for performance sake, especially that you're on prod.
Yeah.
And then I think lastly, if you have to get all that stuff then over to your publish server, at least the way that we've done is we just created like a workflow that literally is one step, which is publish. And then we use the bulk workflow editor for the same purpose so that you can meter your publishing. Because if you try to publish 1 million assets at once, you're going to have a bad day as well.
Great. Getting a couple of questions in the chat. So this is great. Next question is sending emails via workflows considered a good or bad idea?
Based on the reason? Use it SMTP through workflow. I mean, the default behavior of AEM, there's an extra step that goes, hey, once this step is done, send an email, right? Now, do you want to set up that SMTP on a public Google server? Probably not. Do you want to send through your template any PII information? Please don't. But at the end of the day, if you're just sending a notification that says, hey, this step is done, you're now published, then I don't see it, anything bad about it.
Yeah, it's one of the basic, branches in a step to, like, you send out emails to the user groups or users who need to see that workflow and approve or move to the next step. So
yeah, I mean, as long as you're not sending out thousands. I mean, like the same thing, right? If you tell your AEM server to send out 10,000 emails with no metering, it's gonna be no different than running 10,000 assets through the asset processing workflow.
Right.
I found another tricky situation when I was sending out emails by workflows in SaaS, that sometimes my mail server wasn't as consistently up as I wanted it to be. So some emails would go out, some of them won't, and it was very random. So there's another issue, right? How if you send an email, it's a fine, forget, but if it didn't send, then what? And that's what was happening to me. People would say, I received an email. The other people say no. And you're like, okay. So I had to track each email, actually store it, and then resend it because, it was never actually sent properly. So there's another situation.
Did you ever figure out why it was inconsistent?
It was a network issue on the.
Okay. So it was dropping.
Yeah. So, because using the SaaS, going by a proxy. Proxy goes, oh, good, I sent it, but the other side's like, nah, and then it would never happen.
Yeah. You have enterprise security sometimes issues.
Oh, yes.
Yep, network. Which then goes back to the first question we kind of talked about, where you might want to set up your triggers and custom dashboards, but then maybe unnecessarily complicated depending on your setup and how large your organization is and user groups and stuff. But yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Well, suppose maybe, I know we've moved off the other question. There was somebody running 1 million of records. I mean, that's one of those things, right? If you're running a workflow which is running on a lot of stuff, I think I would actually create a CSV file of all those files first, so you know what you've done. Because when you start the workflow, you'll never know when it's going to finish. It'll be very hard, yeah. And if you would consider you running that outside of AEM and trigger each, and actually keep track of each kind of status of each file that you process, right? Rather than just relying on it on hopefully it'll work. Yeah, you won't know the status if it's running in production for a long time. Cool.
Yeah.
Anyway,
All right.
Jessica?
Yeah. What's the best way to ensure that multiple related updated resources of different types, a page with excess CFs, images, all get run through multi-step, multi-person workflow together so we can ensure they get published to preview, then prod consistently? Okay,
so let me repeat that just so I understand, and then you can nod. I won't see you, but put a message on Teams so I know I'm on the right track. So the use case here is you have, let's say, a new experience. You're launching a new part of the site, let's say. So under content projects, I don't know, ENCA, just because I'm Canadian / new project, and you have a tree of pages. And in order for that tree of pages to go out properly, you also have a tree of assets somewhere. And in order for these two to work properly, you also have a tree of content fragments in the DAM and another tree of experience fragments. And you don't want to go in and having to publish each one of those in their own separate workflows. So you want to gather them into one. Am I on the right track for understanding?
Yeah, and Larry, feel free to jump on the call and unmute.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, awesome.
And really the main thing is just making sure that they all publish to one environment together and then publish to the other environment together. Didn't say one workflow, but obviously if they're together somehow, packaged together somehow, that's best. But really, it's also just, this is just for day-to-day page maintenance where there are multiple elements that need to be handled together.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks, Larry. So there is, let's see what's out of box, and let's see how we can get creative. It's out of box. You have the typical publish workflow or just publish button, and that would publish a single resource. Doing that on a bigger project might get a little tedious, and tracking might get a little annoying. The second option is you now keep in mind that if you're on AEM as a cloud service, if you're on the SaaS solution, you have to create a model based on an out-of-box workflow. It's pretty simple, just to get your tree activation or your publish activation. On-prem, you can do a tree activation to the experience. Ooh, on-prem. And then I see those less and less now. But your third option, because even if you do a tree activation, eventually what you're doing is you have multiple workflows running, and you have to track each one of them separately. The third one is, at least in the back of my head, is you can create a custom step. So essentially what you could do is you can create a custom workflow step, and all what it takes is multiple resource paths. So the dialogue of it would be a multi-field that goes, okay, here's the link for all the assets, experience fragments, content fragments, which means that the payload now is going to be the entirety of everything that you want to publish, right? So that way you're tracking this bulky thing as it goes through the process. And then your next step would be just your typical publishing, and you move on from there. I think that would be the most creative out of the bunch if you want to keep them as a single artifact, and I'll keep it to see if the team has something else as well.
So the one other option that crosses my mind would be using just straight up AEM launches. Now, certainly if you're talking multiple pages, that works well. I actually, off the top of my head, can't remember if you can have pages and the experience fragment branch in your DAM and content fragment branch in your DAM. Can they all be part of a single launch? Can anybody validate that? And Max is nodding his head. So that might be another way to group these things all up into one ball, because then you publish that launch, which will include all the features. So it's a little bit confusing if you search for Adobe Launch, because you'll get the old tag system, which is now called tags. But if you look on Experience League for AEM launches, that might be another feature you could leverage.
I have another option. You could use packages. If you're gonna make a custom UI to specify what you want to publish, give it like a little page you do this with, you can make a package, and that'll be super consistent.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think there's a packager in ACS Commons that it will build a package of content based on a query. So if it might still need an option to do exactly what you're trying to do, but it might be 90% there already in that feature if you have some developers that can help.
Yep, yeah, that's right. And if you think about it, if you look at the way that ACS in cloud, or the cloud version, it sends packages as well. So it does packaging and sending. So it sends that same method is being used. So yeah, definitely if you're having actual problems where you want to have this super consistency, like you want to guarantee some sort of compliance, or your security team or your legal team saying we have to make sure this is out. Yeah, if you make a package, you can always go, well, that's the package that went. Definitely one of the banks I work with, they have updates of the share price, and the packages was the only way to guarantee and basically prove that this was basically sent to and deployed.
Great. We got another question. How are workflow comments from rejections, approvals viewed, and where? What's the best way to manage workflow package reviews in the workflow instance console? We are finding it a bit clunky since we can't view comments or click to view payloads for each asset in the package.
Now, if I remember correctly, if your payload has multiple resources, you can't really put a comment to a specific resource, because it's always the metadata is on the workflow, correct?
Yeah, it's in
right. So let me so there's a couple different things. If you think of sites, if the issue is, let's say somebody authored something on a page, the comment should be on that page, right? So sites would allow you to go in and make comments. I think later on in the DEM also you can make comments on assets. However, because the workflow gives you the advantage of doing a one-to-many, right? You have a single payload with multiple resources, but that's also a disadvantage because it's a single payload to many resources. So if you're making comments that are targeting that specific resource, your best bet is to do it on that resource directly. I don't think there is any way in the interface where you can go select a specific path within the workflow and try to target it with a comment. At least I haven't seen one.
Yeah.
I will chime in on that for you, Remy. Yeah, I haven't seen it, and in the past I had to modify the UI to be able to have this. So I used collections, and the collection I made custom buttons for approval, so that the workflow is basically you get a payload to a person who looks through it and approves them one by one, yeah, and then I would track that individually for each person, so that you can actually it's against the asset. You see essentially the comments. You go to the asset. I also had to modify that as well to actually show those comments in there. So I suppose, yeah, they're out of the box. Yeah, it's a bit more complicated, but I think I have a case study on this, Greg, that I want to show you earlier about basically marketing management as part of that.
Yeah.
And modify the UIs. We can share that with people that can look at it if they want to.
Yeah. I can share.
And I know there was. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Craig.
No, I was going to say I can share the GitHub link if you want, Max.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, awesome.
What if you were setting up a variable? I know you can set up variables on workflows, and maybe pull that information for routing decisions, like define expressions and for those routing decisions, and then yeah, I guess I'm thinking out loud here, but you could monitor that way. If you set up a variable to retrieve the value stored in that workflow step. There's I think I've seen that in the documentation and development guide.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, you definitely can do that. For example, if statements work like that.
Yeah. And there are complex data types there as well too, like XML, JSON. So you could have a couple of different options to filter.
Great. Getting a lot of questions. So the next question is, what is the best way to store secrets token in custom workflows? And then Brett asked just to describe the use case a little more. So the use case is, say I have a AWS CloudFront API token for clearing cache, and I run a workflow to automatically clear cache via their SDK via that author token.
It's like, I think the simple answer here is to just simply put that token into an OSGI service configuration that's using the standard way of tokenizing and for secrets. So like your AEM server has a key that you can then encrypt your keys with, so you can put these into your OSGI services. And then you can, if you have a custom workflow step that's grabbing to do this, because I imagine there isn't an out-of-the-box workflow step to push out a cache clear, so you already have this custom step, and it could get that key from that configuration. So it's completely outside your workflows, really, like where this is getting stored. And I think if you're on cloud service, you could set those variables directly via like AIO commands from your DevOps team. If that's preferable, if you don't want them to put them into the code base, but you can encrypt them and put them into the code base as well. I don't know if anybody's got a different answer to that.
Brett, I think you are. No.
Go ahead. I was going to say the same thing as you, Max. You go. It's later for you.
Yeah, and then let's just see, Brett, like the environment variables is a fantastic way of doing it. And if you're going to have a custom set, you might as well just have them using those steps using the environment variables. I mean, you can, if you need to differentiate them, you can just have a drop down for them, for example. Yeah, that would be my position. But without going to SGI route, because it's just one off here. But if it's going to be literally step based, then yeah, you'd want to have some sort of choice by the sound of things.
Yeah, and environment variables in Cloud Manager, it's per tier, so you have the ability to change that token per tier. You can access that token through the Java code. You can access it through, even if you want to go through OSGI, you can go through OSGI. You can access it in the dispatcher, in Maven, so in your POM XML. So it is flexible. My recommendation is if it is truly a secret, put it there. Don't put it in the code base at all, because it is kind of decoupled as well. It doesn't require code deployment. So if you think of the cycle, if that token ever changes, instead of you having to go into the OSGI configuration, do a full deployment all the way to that specific environment, you just go into Cloud Manager, you paste in the new one, you hit accept, give it 5 to 10 minutes, and you're good to go.
Great. All right, next question. So this is more about navigating challenging clients. I have a client who refuses to use ACS AEM Commons because Adobe doesn't support it. This is based on a fear that open source software is untrustworthy, and any packages installed into AEM must have someone who can directly be contacted to support it. They run on-prem AMS, so I run into issues with JS, CSS client libraries since we don't have versioned client libraries. On the development side, I would like to have access to the things like on-deploy jobs, shared component properties, child resource from requests, annotation, and stuff beyond Brett's contributions. What recommendations does the panel have to help me convince this client that ACS AEM Commons is safe?
I mean, Brett, your name was on there. You gotta say something.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust that guy. Honestly, well, let's see. I guess I would just work around the problem if I were just be like, ACS Commons is open source, right? Like, okay, yep, and they trust you to write code for them, obviously, right? Because you're engaged with them, right? Well, if they're not gonna let me put ACS Commons in, I'm literally gonna copy and paste the code in, keep all the licenses on the files. It's open source. You're free to do that, right? Like, why not? And it's no different than then it's in your code base and you're maintaining it. Of course, you're not going to get automatic updates, but the client was already saying, hey, it's not going to get updated. So it's going to be just like the rest of your code, right? And most of these features, they're kind of base level features in ACS Commons. Once they're working, outside of getting new features added to them, a lot of them are just kind of just working and they're not getting regularly tweaked. So I guess that's the first path I would take rather than trying to convince people that don't want to be convinced. I mean, we could go down the whole path of the fact that AEM is built on all sorts of open source libraries, but then they'll say, well, but Adobe does support that, right? So I don't know. I sometimes to me it's not worth the battle, especially if you can pick and choose the features that you want and the code's just sitting right there, so just take it. I don't know if I've got a better idea though, or if anybody's maybe convinced. I'd be curious, Greg, like, being in a regulated industry, have you run into this similar issue with ACS Commons specifically or any other libraries?
Not with I haven't seen it in my days here in the financial industry the last 2 years. We're good with using Commons tools. The last one that we kind of use a lot is the redirect manager. Excuse me, but it all depends on your. I would do the same thing. I would kind of hack it, so to use that term, but it's not really hacking. It's widely acceptable. Like you said, it's open source. It's on GitHub. All that information is up there, so you can test it with your enterprise security and go that route. It's what it's there for. So we haven't had any issues in using ACS Commons tools.
Also, if you look at the contributors, sorry.
It's you and I, Max. It's you and I.
Okay.
I'm gonna raise my hand. I'll be quick, I promise. So I think the idea is if we're looking for a logical argument to sit down in front of whether it's business owners or security, etc., you start from the bottom up, right? So you pick your battles from the easiest to the hardest. First of all, okay, let's use ACS Commons, but let's treat it like any other piece of code that we deploy, right?
Right.
First of all, you're not using all of ACS Commons because it's a humongous library. There are specific things. Now, if you notice, generally ACS Commons has nothing to do with security, right? So it will do, I don't know, a redirect manager. It will make your life easier in some of the JCR information that you're pulling in and out. But none of it is PII, none of it is security, none of it is authentication. So really, the first argument would be, I'm not touching anything that has to do with security. The second one is, it is a piece of code no different, to Brett's point, from what I would have developed. It still goes through testing cycles where it goes to dev, gets tested, goes to UAT, then it goes to production and gets tested again. So if you're using a function or a feature, let's go through the process. Now, if it's, for the lack of a better expression, purely political and they just don't want to touch it, Brett came up with a really good point where not most, but all of AEM is based on open source. Yes, it is supported, but also keep in mind that ACS Commons has been around for, as far as I can remember, like I don't know how many years they've had it, right? It's almost like AEM existed and then ACS came up right away. A lot of the people, not a lot, all the people that do ACS Commons are people like Brett, where they've had a ton of experience when it comes to AEM. It's definitely above average from everybody else that's in the market today. So that's something else to say. Now, if none of this works, and I'll underline the whole point of it's a new piece of code that's tested, no different from any other piece of code that you push to prod, then you can go in and start sort of cherry picking the different features out of it. And I've done this with clients in the past, especially if you're looking at banks and health. There's a couple of departments, when you start dealing with them, they're a little bit picky on things as you go through the process. I mean, the absolute end results would be, okay, I'm going to do this implementation from scratch. It's going to take me 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sprints, and I'll just see how ACS did it and sort of copy it.
Yeah, very good, Rami. I'll add to that. I suppose there's two things that you probably can have a little pick with your client is when they say it's untrustworthy, I'll probably say that it's more trustworthy because it's open source, because it's all there. That's one aspect. Adobe kind of does support it because if you look at the people who commit to that repository, they're like grandpas of AEM, and they get paid to commit to the repository. So really, I'm not sure how even they don't support it. Yes, they do, because the people, they pay those people. Yeah, you see the main commuters. For copying the code, yeah, you can just, I've done this as well in the past. If this client really has issues, you can simply just clone the repo, fork it, whole repo, and just make it part of your pipeline. Just deploy it like it's your code. You don't have to even do bits of it, because then you'll have a much easier way of updating from the source into yours, because you should, like, it's my fork and I just get the pull. So, and then it'll be supported. Yeah. Because you'll say to the client, well, we're just going to fork it and it's going to be ours. So if somehow it will never happen, that repo disappears, we'll still have a copy of it. And that'll answer all of your, that's how I usually go around these kind of pseudo arguments about, not trustworthy. Just fork it and it's ours now, because open source.
Great. One more question from the chat. We are migrating launchers from AMS to cloud with event type node modified. Do we have to do any specific configuration for the launcher to work in cloud, or the as is migrated launcher would work the same?
I haven't personally done this, but what I would say is, have you run like the best practice analyzer? I would do that, because it will typically go through your content as well, make sure that it's all good to go. My gut feeling says no, you don't need to do anything, because at the end of the day, the JCR fundamentally has not changed, right? So I don't see that as a challenge. It's not. Keep in mind that when you're migrating, there is 2 different buckets. There is content and there's APIs, SDK, Java code, and all this good stuff that happens to actually render on the server side. Content, typically, there's a couple different things they have to be aware of. For example, how long your path is. AEM Cloud Service has a limit, I think, is it 250 characters? I remember making a joke about this because it reminds me of Windows back in the day. But these are the things that you need to worry about, right? I don't think no type would differ, but again, I haven't personally done it, but my gut feeling says it should be okay. Best practice analyzer, though.
I've done it, Rami. It's fine. I didn't have to do any updates. Done it a couple of times now, and it's same stuff.
Great. Please feel free to send any more questions through the chat or speak up, raise your hand. We're happy to talk to you. I'm gonna kind of move it backwards a little bit, go back in time. And I think Max had a couple updates on maybe a previous office hours for content structure.
Yes, thanks. I'll do it quickly so that we can get to other questions. So I owed a couple of artifacts for everyone who's been asking me for it. So there's one was about the content structure. So I briefly showed a presentation of a spreadsheet, a Google worksheet that I use to plan taxonomies and content within AEM. So before migration, post migration, just to be able to give people a way to look at this somewhere outside of AEM. I'll post a link into that into the chat, and then another update that I also have made a presentation for the total cost of ownership of AEM. There's a lot of questions come up with everybody asking, hey, how do we help our IT people or business people to wrap their heads around it'll be cheaper to do SaaS, and what are the costs for it? So I have a few nice little kind of points there. I will share the presentation as well in the link. I suppose maybe I'll copy and paste it. So you'll be able to find these two artifacts to help you. Yep, oh, very good. Somebody already opened it. And then there's also another presentation which is just below there. I'll copy these links into chat. That so Coros, you can scroll down here. Yeah, so this is basically the mother slide that should help everyone to kind of show their IT people or the CTOs, their IT people to how the costs are.
Is that Australian dollars, Max?
Yeah, it's Australian dollars. Yeah, I mean you can extrapolate it. Really, it's going to be if you convert this to I should have put it in the US dollars, but it's Australian dollars. Yeah.
No, I know. I'm kidding. This is very helpful. This is great. Thank you.
Because we had a client, he also asked the exact same question. So I sat down with one of the Adobe architects as well. We went through this, and this came out from it. So hopefully this will be helpful. If you have any questions, bring it back, send it to us in the next conversations, and otherwise, we can answer it.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and completely. That was a nice lead-in, Max. Thanks. Completely unplanned, but I'm actually at the AEM Skill Exchange, which is about a month from now or 3 weeks from now. I'm actually covering AEM Cloud Service Migration. One of the topics that I also cover there is, hey, if you're ever going to convince anybody to move the AEM Cloud Service, you got to come up with a value proposition. And so I do walk through a couple ways that I help foster that conversation. So you might be able to pick up some tools and approaches there that you can use to have that conversation with your stakeholders to get it to that top of the list. Because a lot of times I am seeing similar where a lot of clients they want to go, they know they should go, but it always seems to be kind of like second in the priority list. And it really comes down to the fact that they're just they're not clearly seeing that the value is there. And so we do need to help them see that with real tools.
I'm not picking on anybody but Larry. Make sure you go to that one. Because I know you're on-prem.
I think I need to attend it too. Larry, I'm right with you.
That's awesome.
It's
so funny.
I'm
prem for life. Just kidding. Don't want to be.
No. You gotta move.
I'm kidding. Jokes. I don't see any additional questions, but I do know I believe we have still 10 minutes left. So if there's anything else we want to cover, we're happy to or discuss.
Well, wide open question. So for those of us who are managed services or on-prem and thinking about cloud, when it comes to workflows, are there for anyone who's used workflows on cloud service, are there any top 3 highlights or differences or enhancements in the workflows in the cloud service? Is it like going back to the dashboard question? Do we have any enhancements there, or is it all the same pretty much, but monitored through different dashboards? What do you see for those who have used cloud service workflows in cloud service?
I'm waiting for somebody to say update asset workflow. Because not an enhancement, it's a fundamental change again. So when you're on-prem or AMS, you have resources, you have a server underneath, you have image magic, which is typically how you've created renditions in the past, right? Once you move into a containerized approach, a lot of it is based on microservices, right? So it's not, the container is not going to do the work for you, right? What it does is there's a microservice, it goes out, takes the asset, processes the asset, and brings it back. Now, there is a magical upside to this, and I've done this in the past. You can have terabytes worth of assets. And I remember, was it Larry again? But running workflow on a million different assets. Now, if you're creating a rendition, it's no longer going to affect performance. It's as simple as that. It's going to take its time, but it's not going to affect performance because AEM is not doing any work. It's literally you're taking all these assets, you're creating renditions outside, and they come back. Now, there is a couple things. Because of that, your upgrade or your update workflow will not work. It's gone, right? You have to go in, create profiles on these folders in order to create the same renditions again. Now, keep in mind, and this is the sort of gotcha that I had to run into a couple times, the naming convention of the assets of the renditions change. So there's no longer, you can't no longer do the dots. So there's the out of box, I think there's 5 renditions, like the 1280 by 1280, and I can't remember the rest of them, but there's 4 or 5 renditions that come out of box. Those will still have the same sort of naming convention, web CQ or CQ web dot, and then you get your rendition. Anything that you're adding on top now will not have dots, which kind of makes sense. I've always wondered why we had dots, considering that we run on Sling and everything is selectors. That always got me a little, but so just keep in mind what we had to do in the past is if you have custom renditions, we had to go in and create profiles, but then we had to go back to the components that use these renditions and change the naming convention to use whatever we've come up with. The biggest enhancement here is, again, it does not affect your performance. I think that's like my number one gotcha.
That's solid advice, yeah, and tips there, Rami. Thank you.
Quick question in the chat. If we need to bring in any of the AI capabilities, is it that we need to move to AEM as a cloud service, or do we have anything, any innovation that we can bring into AEM instance? We are AMS assets customer.
Cloud service independent.
Go ahead, Greg.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think it's independent of like managed cloud service, but you could. There's some integrations that I've seen. I've seen a couple of articles on Medium.com where you can create, add like, for example, the content author side, the authoring side, you can have like content editing and like Grammarly editing of content in your editor window and things like that, but I don't think it's tied to cloud service.
Yeah, I have to imagine, correct us if we're wrong, Priya, I imagine you're talking about generative AI just because it's top of mind everybody right now in the industry. A lot of the features generative AI wise for AEM have not yet been released, but when they are, I imagine they will hit cloud service first. However, you know, to Greg's point, some of these integrations are pretty basic. People are like, I mean, basic on a technical level. They're, you know, if we're integrating, for instance, with like an open AI, those integrations are not a huge amount of developer effort. So we're already seeing on the market some people doing those. I know at Bounteous, we're doing the same thing with our accelerator, just baking some of those features in for earlier access than when Adobe releases them to the tool. But I do anticipate that if there's some of those core tools, they will probably release them to cloud service first, just like every feature nowadays. They've been pretty good about backporting all that stuff to 6.5 as well. I personally don't know how long that's going to go on for. I'm actually impressed it has gone as long as it has. Cloud service has been on the market for 3 years. I mean, 6.5, when was that? Was that 2019? I don't remember exactly, but you know, in the past it was like 2 years and you were no longer supported, and they've really kind of supported 6.5 for a long time, because I think there's a lot of customers like you in your situation. However, at some point that'll probably become less true. I just don't think there's anything special about these features. The only thing I can think of is there is a universal editor that they talked about at Summit. That particularly, I don't know if that universal editor will work with on-prem. That might be something to follow up with your Adobe rep. I believe that's in beta right now, closed beta.
Yeah, and as a follow-up, I actually had that discussion with one of the Adobe reps. The more and more things go to the cloud, the more challenging it is to go back and attach it to an on-prem or even AMS. AMS will still be easier, because it's still within sort of Adobe's control. But on-prem does add a whole bunch of challenges because now you're going through DMZs and red tape and a whole bunch of this stuff. But yeah, no, I do agree. All in all, I think the conclusion is, as Adobe goes through the progression, you'll always find the gap between what AEM as a cloud services SaaS solution provides and everything else. And I honestly think it makes sense because of the simplicity and the control, right? One of the biggest things for AEM as a cloud service, I mean, it's not all flowers and rosy. There are challenges when you go into container, but the idea is you're herding cats. A lot of the challenges for people who worked with AEM for a very long time, they know developers get creative, and we get pretty creative. So you give us an open source platform, and we'll go crazy, right? It's just, we'll just take the longest way around to do anything because that's what business told us, or hammer and nail, right? But when you go into AEM as a cloud service, they're compressing that ability, right? Because they're going, here's the right way of doing things, and now you don't have an option.
Yeah,
that's it. That's what you're doing. Or your life is going to be a little bit challenging. But because of that, the development I've seen, like, again, going back from CQ 4.4 all the way now, the past probably year, the progression and the features and everything else that goes on a weekly or a monthly release has been quite drastically improved in speed. And I'm not sure if the rest of the team sees that as well. So keep in mind that gap will keep increasing simply because now they have that environment that they know could be tested and nobody can go in and screw around with it.
Agreed, Rami. Very good, mate.
All right. Well, I guess the last couple minutes. There was just one more comment. AEM 6.5 has some AI ML features, smart tagging of assets, visual search and crop. Great. So with that, you'll be able to find the recording for this on YouTube and then on the Office Hours website. And then I know I saw Robert chatted. Please feel free to take the survey after this event is closed. It'll be sent out. We want to hear your thoughts. And then if you have any ideas for our next topic for our next Office Hours, that would be great too. Other than that, does anyone else have any final thoughts?
This was great.
Yeah, thank you all. Yeah, these people are
Thank you,
awesome.
guys.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you everyone for the questions. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, guys.